The firewood stack measured barely half what his neighbors had accumulated. James Peterson surveyed his modest pile in late October 1871, aware that others were already questioning his winter preparations. His neighbor, Robert Miller, paused during his evening walk, concern evident across his weathered features. "That quantity won't sustain you through January," Robert warned, gesturing toward the limited timber supply. "Your family will suffer when the cold arrives." James offered a slight smile. "We'll manage comfortably with what I've prepared." Robert shook his head with visible skepticism. "You've perhaps 3 quarts there. I've stockpiled 12 and anticipate requiring additional supplies. This strikes me as poor judgment." Yet James Peterson's decision was far from foolish. He had engineered a heating apparatus so remarkably efficient it would consume merely 1/4 the fuel of conventional fireplaces while delivering superior warmth at virtually no operational expense. When that brutal winter concluded, neighbors would desperately harvest green timber and sacrifice furniture for heat, while the Peterson household remained comfortably warm with reserves remaining. This narrative chronicles how one frontier family revolutionized domestic heating through ingenious combination of thermal storage and optimized air circulation, how they endured the savage winter of 1871 through 72 in comfort, while surrounding families struggled desperately, and how their breakthrough spread throughout the frontier, rescuing innumerable families from freezing temperatures and financial devastation. James Peterson entered this world in 1835 within Norway's borders, immigrating to America with his family in 1850 at 15 years of age. He matured in Wisconsin Territory, mastering carpentry and stonework under his father's instruction, a man who had practiced building trades in their homeland. By 1868, James had married, established a family, and claimed 160 acres of Minnesota Territory under the Homestead Act provisions enacted in 1862. The Peterson household, comprising James, his wife Anna, and their 3 offspring, Eric, aged 8, Ingrid, aged 6, and infant Lars, constructed their dwelling during summer 1868. The log structure measured 20 feet by 24 feet with a sleeping loft above. Like most frontier families, they heated their residence with a substantial stone fireplace, burning timber continuously from October through April for warmth. However, James rapidly recognized the traditional fireplace's tremendous inefficiency. He consumed enormous timber quantities, 8 to 10 cords annually. Yet the dwelling remained perpetually cold. The fireplace would blaze intensely, yet heat escaped directly through the chimney. Air near the hearth became uncomfortably hot while corners remained frigid. At night, when flames subsided, temperatures plummeted and the family awakened to frost-coating interior walls. During winter 1868 through 69, James calculated that firewood gathering consumed nearly half his available time. The labor proved exhausting and hazardous. Several neighbors had suffered injuries or death in logging accidents, and the expenditure in time, physical effort, and resources was staggering. James estimated firewood represented approximately 30% of his family's total annual expenses when accounting for gathering time. A superior method must exist. James recalled heating systems from Norway where winters extended brutally and fuel was expensive. Norwegian residences utilized masonry stoves, substantial structures constructed from brick or soapstone that absorbed fire heat and radiated it gradually over many hours. These stoves operated with remarkable efficiency, consuming fractional amounts of timber compared to open fireplaces. Yet James had never constructed such apparatus, possessed no detailed blueprints, and retained only childhood recollections of their operation. He would need to determine the mechanics himself through experimentation and innovation, creating his own design adapted to frontier circumstances and available materials. He devoted winter 1869 through 70 observing his fireplace, attempting to comprehend where heat escaped and how it might be captured. He noticed chimney stones remained warm, occasionally too hot for direct contact, indicating enormous heat quantities were being absorbed by masonry, then lost to exterior air. He observed fire burned hottest with proper air circulation, yet most heat from intense fires escaped directly through the chimney without warming the room. He began formulating theory. If he could route hot smoke through extended masonry pathways before chimney exit, the masonry would absorb heat and radiate it into the room over numerous hours. And if he could regulate air circulation to make fire burn hotter and more completely, he could extract greater heat from less timber. In spring 1870, James commenced designing his heating system. He sketched plans, calculated dimensions, and assembled materials. His design would incorporate three fundamental innovations. First, a firebox constructed from fire brick that would burn timber at extremely high temperatures with controlled air circulation. The firebox would be compact and insulated, generating intense, efficient fire that would consume wood completely, producing minimal smoke or creosote. Second, a serpentine flue system routing hot exhaust gases through several hundred pounds of masonry before chimney exit. The gases would enter the flue at approximately 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit and exit at perhaps 200 degrees, meaning 1,000 degrees worth of heat had transferred to masonry. Third, a thermal mass chamber surrounding the flue system constructed from river stone and clay that would store heat and radiate it gradually over 12 to 24 hours. The thermal mass would function like a battery, storing heat from brief, intense fire and releasing it gradually throughout day and night. The design was ambitious and unverified. James possessed no guarantee of success, no method for testing without complete construction, and no expert consultation available. If his calculations proved incorrect, he would have squandered months of labor and materials, and his family would confront another winter with insufficient heating. Yet James trusted his design. The physics seemed sound. Heat rises, yet if forced through extended masonry pathways, the masonry will absorb it. Thermal mass stores heat and releases it slowly. Controlled air circulation makes fires burn hotter and more efficiently. These were established principles, and James was simply applying them innovatively. In June 1870, James initiated construction. The first step proved most difficult, partially dismantling the existing fireplace that had served his family 2 years. Anna observed anxiously as James removed stones from the structure, worried they were destroying their sole heat source with winter still months distant. "What if your design fails, James?" she questioned. "What if we've demolished a functional fireplace for nothing?" James comprehended her fear. They were gambling their family's survival on an unproven design, on his recollections of Norwegian stoves, on his conviction that he could improve upon centuries of frontier heating tradition. Yet he had calculated the risks, had planned meticulously, and believed the potential reward justified the gamble. "It will function, Anna. I promise you." He salvaged stones from the old fireplace for reuse, carefully cleaning mortar from each stone and stacking them for later application. Then he began excavating the foundation for the new heating system. The ground was rigid, the labor exhausting. He excavated 3 feet down, reaching bedrock, creating a stable foundation for the heavy masonry structure he was about to construct. The foundation excavation measured 6 feet by 4 feet, larger than the old fireplace footprint, and required removing approximately 2 tons of soil and rock. His son Eric, age 8, assisted by carrying buckets of excavated material from the cabin. His daughter Ingrid, age 6, brought water from the well. Even at their tender ages, the children understood this project's importance, that their father was constructing something that would keep them warm through the approaching winter. The foundation required a week to complete. James laid flat stones at the excavation bottom, creating a level base. He filled gaps with gravel and tamped it solid. He built up the foundation with salvaged fireplace stones using lime mortar for binding, creating a structure that rose to floor level. Next came the most expensive component, ordering fire brick from St. Paul. James required approximately 200 fire bricks for the firebox and initial flue section. Fire brick was expensive, perhaps 50 cents per brick in 1870, meaning the fire brick alone would cost $100, a significant sum for a frontier family. James placed his order through the general store in the nearest town 15 miles distant. The fire bricks would arrive by rail to St. Paul, then by wagon to town. Then James would haul them home in his own wagon. The entire process would require 6 weeks. While awaiting fire brick delivery, James gathered remaining materials. He needed river rock for thermal mass, smooth, dense stones that would retain heat effectively. The best rocks were located in the stream running through his property. Stones tumbled smooth by water over thousands of years, dense and heavy, absorbing heat like a battery absorbs electricity. James devoted 2 weeks gathering rocks. He would wade into the stream, select stones that felt appropriate, heavy for their size, smooth, without cracks or flaws, and transport them to his wagon. Each load weighed approximately 500 pounds. He made perhaps 10 trips, hauling approximately 5,000 pounds of rock total, more than ultimately needed, yet better to have surplus than shortage during construction. Eric and Ingrid helped gather smaller rocks, stones weighing perhaps 5 to 10 pounds each. The children made a game of it, competing to find the smoothest stone, the roundest stone, the prettiest stone. They didn't fully comprehend their father's construction project, yet they understood every rock they gathered was important, was part of something that would help their family. James also needed clay for mortar. A clay deposit existed on his property, approximately quarter-mile from the cabin, where a stream had cut through a hillside exposing a thick gray clay layer. James excavated clay from this deposit, filling buckets, hauling it back to the cabin. He needed perhaps 500 pounds of clay for the mortar that would bind stones together. The clay required processing before use. James mixed it with sand in a ratio of approximately 1 part clay to 3 parts sand, then added water to create workable mortar. The sand prevented clay from cracking as it dried, while clay provided binding strength. The mixture had to achieve proper consistency, not too wet, not too dry, and James tested batches until achieving the right formula. By late July, the fire bricks had arrived. James made the trip to town with his wagon, loaded the 200 fire bricks carefully, and hauled them home. Each brick weighed approximately 8 pounds, meaning the total load was 1,600 pounds. The wagon groaned under the weight, and James had to stop frequently to rest the horses. Now, authentic construction could commence. James built the firebox first. This was the system's heart, the chamber where wood would burn at temperatures exceeding 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. The firebox had to be constructed perfectly, with thin mortar joints with fire bricks laid precisely, with no gaps or flaws that could allow heat escape or smoke leakage. He used special refractory mortar for the fire brick, a mixture of fire clay and sand that could withstand high temperatures without cracking. He laid each brick carefully, checking level and plumb, tapping bricks into position with a rubber mallet, scraping away excess mortar. The work was slow and meticulous. A single day's effort might result in only 20 bricks laid. The firebox measured 18 inches wide, 24 inches deep, and 18 inches high, approximately 4½ cubic feet of interior volume. This was substantially smaller than a traditional fireplace opening, which might be 36 inches wide and 24 inches high, yet the small size was intentional. A smaller firebox would burn hotter and more efficiently, would create the intense heat needed for complete combustion. James built a door frame into the front of the firebox using angle iron, salvage from a broken plow. The door would be constructed of cast iron, which he would order from the same supplier that had provided the fire bricks. The door had to seal tightly to control air circulation, had to be heavy enough to withstand the heat, had to have a handle that would not conduct heat to the exterior. Below the firebox, James constructed an ash chamber, a space where ash could fall through a grate and be removed without disturbing the fire. The ash chamber had a small door at the front, allowing James to clean out ash every few days. The ash chamber also served as the primary air intake. Air would flow through the ash chamber, up through the grate, and into the firebox, feeding the fire with oxygen. Above the ash chamber door, James installed an adjustable air vent, a sliding plate that could be opened or closed to control the amount of air entering the firebox. This was crucial for controlling burn rate. With the vent fully open, the fire would burn hot and fast. With the vent partially closed, the fire would burn slower and more steadily. With the vent fully closed, the fire would die out. The firebox required 2 weeks to build. When complete, James allowed the refractory mortar to cure for several days before proceeding to the next step. Next came the flue system, the serpentine pathway that would route hot exhaust gases through the masonry, transferring heat from gases to thermal mass. This was the most innovative part of James's design, the element that would make the system dramatically more efficient than a traditional fireplace. A traditional fireplace has a straight vertical flue. Hot gases rise straight up and exit through the chimney, taking most of their heat with them. The chimney stones absorb some heat, yet most heat is lost to exterior air. James's serpentine flue would change that fundamentally. The hot gases would be forced to travel a long, winding path through the masonry before exiting. Every foot of travel would transfer heat from gases to surrounding masonry. By the time gases reached the chimney, they would be relatively cool, perhaps 200 degrees Fahrenheit instead of 1,200 degrees, meaning 1,000 degrees worth of heat had been transferred to thermal mass. James built the flue using a combination of fire brick for the hottest sections near the firebox and regular brick and stone for cooler sections farther from the firebox. The flue had a cross-section of approximately 6 inches by 6 inches, large enough to allow gases to flow freely, small enough to maintain good heat transfer to surrounding masonry. The flue pathway was complex. It started at the top of the firebox, rose vertically for 2 feet, then turned 90 degrees and traveled horizontally for 6 feet toward the back of the cabin. Then it turned 90 degrees again and traveled back toward the front of the cabin for 6 feet. Then it turned 90 degrees and rose vertically for 2 feet. Then it turned 90 degrees and traveled horizontally for 4 feet. Then it finally turned and rose vertically to connect to the exterior chimney. The total length of the flue path was approximately 22 feet compared to perhaps 8 feet for a traditional straight chimney. The hot gases would travel nearly 3 times as far, surrendering heat at every inch of the journey. Building the serpentine flue was challenging. James had to maintain the correct slope. The flue had to rise slightly as it traveled horizontally, ensuring that gases would flow properly and that condensation would drain back toward the firebox rather than pooling in the flue. He had to ensure that the turns were smooth without sharp angles that would restrict flow. He had to seal every joint perfectly, preventing smoke from leaking into the cabin. The flue construction required 3 weeks. James worked slowly and carefully, checking his work constantly, rebuilding sections that were not perfect. Anna watched with growing concern as the structure grew larger and more complex, wondering if James had undertaken more than he could accomplish. Yet James persisted. He had committed to this project, had invested time and money and his family's hopes in it, and he would see it through to completion. As the flue system took shape, James began constructing the thermal mass chamber around it. This was the element that would store heat and radiate it slowly over many hours, transforming a 2-hour fire into 12 to 24 hours of warmth. James packed river rocks around the flue path, using clay mortar to bind them together. He started at the bottom and worked his way up layer by layer, surrounding every inch of the flue with dense, heat-absorbing stone. The rocks varied, in size from perhaps 3 inches to 8 inches in diameter, and James fitted them together like a 3-dimensional puzzle, minimizing gaps, maximizing density. The thermal mass chamber grew slowly, rising from floor to ceiling, expanding to fill the space James had allocated for the heating system. The structure was massive, perhaps 3,000 pounds of brick, stone, and clay when complete. It occupied approximately 40 square feet of floor space, a significant portion of the cabin's limited interior. Anna complained about the space it consumed. James, we're surrendering 1/4 of our cabin to this apparatus. Are you certain it's worth it? James understood her concern. Space was precious in a frontier cabin, yet he also knew that the heating system, if it worked as designed, would be worth far more than the space it occupied. Anna, if this functions properly, we'll be warmer than we've ever been, and we'll use a fraction of the wood. We'll have more time, more comfort, more security. It's worth the space. The thermal mass construction required another 3 weeks. By late August, the structure was nearly complete. James built the exterior chimney last, connecting it to the end of the serpentine flue system. The chimney was shorter than a traditional fireplace chimney, only 15 feet tall instead of 25, because the draft requirements were different. The serpentine flue created resistance to airflow, so a shorter chimney was actually better, providing just enough draft to pull air through the system without pulling too much heat out. James constructed the chimney from brick using lime mortar, ensuring that it was straight and stable. He capped the top with a stone cap that would prevent rain from entering while allowing smoke to exit. He built a clean-out door at the chimney base, allowing him to remove any soot or creosote that might accumulate. By early September 1870, the heating system was complete. The entire structure, firebox, flue system, thermal mass chamber, and chimney stood as a testament to James's vision, skill, and determination. It was massive, complex, and unlike anything his neighbors had ever seen. Yet would it function? James allowed the structure to cure for 2 weeks, allowing the mortar and clay to dry and harden completely. During this time, neighbors came to observe what James had built. They examined the structure with curiosity and skepticism, asking questions, expressing doubts. Robert Miller, James' closest neighbor, was particularly skeptical. James, this apparatus is enormous. It consumes half your cabin, and you claim it's going to heat better than a fireplace. I fail to see how that's possible. James explained the principles: thermal mass, heat transfer, controlled combustion. Yet Robert remained unconvinced. I'll believe it when I witness it, James. Right now, it just appears you've constructed a very expensive pile of rocks in your cabin. Other neighbors were more encouraging. John Anderson, a Swedish immigrant who had some familiarity with European heating systems, recognized what James was attempting. I've seen something similar in Sweden, James. If you've built it correctly, it should function very well. The Swedes have been using masonry stoves for centuries. Yet even John had doubts about whether James had built it correctly. The problem is, James, these systems are tricky. If the flue path is wrong, or if the thermal mass is not dense enough, or if the firebox does not burn hot enough, the whole thing won't work. And you've built this from memory and guesswork, without plans or expert guidance. I hope it works. James understood the doubts. He had doubts himself. Yet he had done his best, had applied every bit of knowledge and skill he possessed, and now it was time to test whether his best was good enough. By September 1870, the heating system was complete. James allowed it to cure for 2 weeks, allowing the mortar and clay to dry and harden. Then, in late September, he lit the first test fire. He loaded the firebox with dry pine kindling and small splits of oak. He opened the air vent fully and ignited the fire. The kindling caught immediately, and within minutes, the firebox was roaring, the flames intense and white-hot. James could feel the heat radiating from the firebox door, could hear the fire roaring inside the chamber. He allowed the fire to burn for 30 minutes, feeding it small pieces of wood, building up a bed of coals, and the firebox temperature climbed to perhaps 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough that the fire brick glowed dull red. The fire was burning so hot and so completely that there was almost no visible smoke from the chimney, just a shimmer of heat rising from the top. After 30 minutes, James closed the air vent partially, reducing the airflow, letting the fire settle into a steady, efficient burn. He added larger pieces of wood, oak splits, perhaps 4 inches in diameter and 18 inches long. The fire consumed them steadily, the wood gasifying and burning completely, leaving only fine, white ash. James monitored the system carefully, checking temperatures, watching for smoke or problems, adjusting the air vent to optimize the burn. After 2 hours, he allowed the fire to die down, closing the air vent completely, letting the last coals burn out. And then he waited. The thermal mass had absorbed enormous amounts of heat during the 2-hour burn. The river rocks surrounding the flue were hot, perhaps 400 degrees Fahrenheit at the core, cooler toward the exterior. The mass would now radiate that heat into the cabin over the next 12 to 24 hours. James placed his hand on the exterior surface of the thermal mass chamber. It was warm, perhaps 120 degrees Fahrenheit, comfortable to touch, yet radiating significant heat. He could feel the warmth spreading through the cabin, could feel the temperature rising, could feel the system working exactly as he had designed. Over the next 12 hours, the cabin stayed warm. The temperature remained steady at perhaps 68 degrees Fahrenheit, comfortable for the family, warm enough that they did not need extra blankets or layers of clothing. The thermal mass radiated heat slowly and evenly, warming the entire cabin, not just the area near the fire. By the next morning, 18 hours after the fire had gone out, the cabin was still warm, perhaps 62 degrees Fahrenheit. The thermal mass was still radiating heat, though the surface temperature had dropped to perhaps 90 degrees Fahrenheit. James lit another fire that morning, another 2-hour burn, recharging the thermal mass, and the cycle continued. 2 hours of fire, 12 to 18 hours of radiant heat, 2 fires per day, morning and evening, were enough to keep the cabin warm around the clock. James calculated the wood consumption. Each fire used perhaps 15 pounds of wood. 2 fires per day meant 30 pounds of wood per day. Over a 6-month winter, 180 days, that would be 5,400 pounds of wood, or approximately 2.7 cords. His old fireplace had used approximately 8 to 10 cords per winter. The new system would use less than 3 cords. James had reduced his wood consumption by 70% while actually improving the comfort and warmth of his home. The economic implications were staggering. James had been spending perhaps 120 hours per month during winter cutting, splitting, and hauling firewood for the old fireplace. With the new system, he would spend perhaps 35 hours per month, a reduction of 85 hours per month, or more than 500 hours over the winter. That time could be spent on other productive activities, on rest, on family, on anything other than the endless labor of feeding an inefficient fireplace. The financial savings were equally significant. If you valued James's labor at even a modest rate, the new heating system was saving him perhaps $200 per winter in time and wood, a huge sum for a frontier family whose total annual cash income might be only $300 to $400. And the comfort improvement was dramatic. The old fireplace had created hot and cold zones, had required constant tending, had filled the cabin with smoke when the wind blew wrong. The new system provided even, comfortable heat, required attention only twice per day, and produced almost no smoke or odor. James was thrilled. His experiment had worked better than he had hoped. His family would be warm and comfortable all winter, and he would have time and energy for other work. Yet he kept the system secret through the fall of 1870, not telling his neighbors about it, not explaining why his wood pile was so small. He wanted to prove the system through a full winter before making claims that might seem too good to be true. The winter of 1870 to 71 was moderate, with temperatures typically in the teens and 20s Fahrenheit. Occasional cold snaps down to 0 or below. James's heating system performed flawlessly. 2 fires per day kept the cabin warm and comfortable. The family slept well. The children were healthy, and James had time to work on other projects, building furniture, repairing tools, planning for spring planting. His neighbors, meanwhile, were struggling. Robert Miller, who had mocked James's small woodpile, was burning through his 12 cords of wood at an alarming rate. By January, Robert was cutting green wood, which burned poorly, and created enormous amounts of smoke and creosote. By March, Robert was burning fence rails and scrap lumber, desperately trying to stay warm. Other neighbors faced similar problems. The winter of 1870 to 71 was not particularly severe, yet the inefficiency of traditional fireplaces meant that families were spending enormous amounts of time and labor on heating, were still cold despite their efforts, and were depleting their wood supplies at unsustainable rates. In the spring of 1871, James finally revealed his heating system to his neighbors. He invited several families to visit his cabin, showed them the thermal mass heater, explained how it worked, and shared his wood consumption data. The neighbors were skeptical at first. The system seemed too good to be true. How could such a simple idea, routing smoke through masonry, make such a dramatic difference? Yet James's wood pile told the story. He had used less than 3 cords of wood, had stayed warm all winter, and still had wood left over. Robert Miller examined the system carefully, asked detailed questions, and finally admitted that James had discovered something remarkable. "If this works as well as you say, James, you've solved one of the biggest problems we face out here. Heating costs us more in time and labor than almost anything else. If we could cut that by 70%. Other neighbors agreed. The potential impact was enormous. If every family could reduce their wood consumption by 70%, they could redirect hundreds of hours of labor to other productive activities. They could be warmer and more comfortable. They could reduce the risk of logging accidents. They could preserve forests and reduce the environmental impact of frontier settlement. Several neighbors asked James to help them build similar systems. James agreed, yet warned them that the construction was complex, required specific materials, and needed to be done correctly to work safely and effectively. A poorly built system could be dangerous, could fill a home with carbon monoxide, could crack and leak smoke, could even cause fires. James spent the summer of 1871 helping 3 neighbors build thermal mass heaters. He supervised the construction, ensured proper design and materials, and taught the families how to operate the systems effectively. The construction took approximately 2 weeks per system, with James providing expertise and the homeowner providing labor and materials. By October 1871, 4 families in the area had thermal mass heating systems. James's original system, plus 3 new ones built under his supervision. The systems varied slightly in design, adapted to different cabin sizes and layouts, yet all incorporated the same basic principles: high-temperature firebox, serpentine flue, thermal mass storage. And then came the winter of 1871 to 72. The first snow fell on October the 28th, 1871, earlier than usual. By November 5th, temperatures had dropped below zero and would not rise above freezing again until March. This was not a normal winter. This was a winter that would be remembered for generations, a winter that would kill cattle and people, a winter that would test every survival strategy and expose every weakness in frontier life. November brought sustained cold. Temperatures stayed between 0 and 10 below 0 Fahrenheit for weeks. The ground froze solid to a depth of 4 feet. Streams and rivers froze completely. Snow accumulated steadily, reaching depths of 3 feet by the end of the month. James Peterson's thermal mass heater performed exactly as designed. He lit fires twice per day, morning and evening, each fire burning for approximately 2 hours. The firebox would roar with intense heat, the flames white-hot, the wood gasifying and burning completely. Then James would close the air vent, allow the fire to die down, and the thermal mass would radiate heat for the next 12 hours. The cabin stayed comfortable. The temperature inside remained between 65 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Warm enough that the family wore normal clothing, warm enough that the children could play on the floor, warm enough that Anna could bake bread and cook meals without shivering. At night, the family slept comfortably under light blankets, the radiant heat from the thermal mass keeping the cabin warm, even as temperatures outside dropped to 20 below zero. James' wood consumption was modest. He was burning perhaps 35 pounds of wood per day, 2 fires of approximately 17 pounds each. The wood burned so completely that there was almost no ash, almost no smoke, almost no waste. Every BTU of energy in the wood was being captured and used to heat the cabin. Meanwhile, Robert Miller and the other families with traditional fireplaces were struggling. Robert's fireplace consumed enormous amounts of wood, perhaps 150 pounds per day, and still the cabin was cold. The area near the fireplace would be uncomfortably hot, yet the corners of the cabin remained freezing. At night, when the fire died down, the temperature would plummet, and the family would wake to frost on the inside walls. Robert was spending 4 to 5 hours per day cutting, splitting, and hauling firewood. The work was exhausting and dangerous in the extreme cold. His hands were constantly chapped and bleeding from handling frozen wood. His back ached from the endless labor of swinging an axe and carrying heavy loads. He was losing weight, was constantly tired, was falling behind on other necessary work. By mid-November, Robert came to James's cabin to borrow tools. He stepped inside and was immediately struck by the warmth and comfort. The Peterson family was sitting at the table, the children doing schoolwork, Anna sewing, James carving a wooden toy. The cabin was warm, peaceful, comfortable. It was a stark contrast to Robert's own cabin, where his family huddled near the fireplace, wrapped in blankets, shivering despite the roaring fire. "James, how is it so warm in here?" Robert asked. "It must be 20 below outside, yet your cabin feels like spring." James gestured to the thermal mass heater. "The system is working exactly as I designed it. 2 fires per day, and we stay warm round the clock." Robert examined the heater, placing his hand on the exterior surface. It was warm, perhaps 110 degrees Fahrenheit, radiating gentle, steady heat. "And you're only burning, what, 30 pounds of wood per day?" "About that, yes." Robert shook his head in disbelief. "I'm burning 5 times that much, and my family's freezing. James, I should have listened to you. I should have built one of these systems when you offered to help." "It's not too late, Robert. When spring comes, I'll help you build one." Yet spring was a long way off, and Robert would have to survive the winter with his inefficient fireplace. December brought even colder temperatures. On December 15th, 1871, the temperature dropped to 30 below zero. On December 22nd, it reached 35 below. On December 28th, during a clear, calm night, the temperature dropped to 40 below zero, cold enough that trees would crack from the freezing sap, cold enough that exposed skin would freeze in minutes, cold enough that breathing the air hurt. James's heating system handled the extreme cold without difficulty. He increased the size of his fires slightly, burning perhaps 20 pounds of wood per fire instead of 17, and the cabin stayed warm. The thermal mass absorbed the extra heat and radiated it steadily, maintaining a comfortable temperature even as the world outside froze solid. Yet for families with traditional fireplaces, December was a nightmare. They were burning wood as fast as they could cut it, and still they were cold. Some families were burning green wood, wood that had not been properly seasoned, wood that was still full of moisture, because they had exhausted their supply of dry wood. Green wood burns poorly, produces enormous amounts of smoke and creosote, and provides perhaps half the heat of dry wood. The smoke from green wood was making people sick. Children developed coughs and respiratory problems. Adults suffered from constant headaches and eye irritation. The interiors of cabins were coated with black soot, and the creosote buildup in chimneys was creating a serious fire hazard. On December 30th, 1871, a cabin 3 miles from James's homestead caught fire when creosote in the chimney ignited. The family escaped, yet the cabin burned to the ground. They lost everything: their home, their possessions, their food stores. They were forced to move in with relatives, doubling up in an already crowded cabin, adding strain to everyone's resources. January 1872 brought the worst weather yet. On January 10th, a blizzard moved in, bringing winds of 50 miles per hour and temperatures of 40 below zero. The blizzard lasted 3 days. Snow fell so thick that visibility was reduced to perhaps 10 feet. The wind created drifts 15 feet high. The combination of wind and cold created wind chills of perhaps 70 below zero, cold enough to kill an exposed human in minutes. James's family stayed inside during the blizzard, safe and warm. The cabin was well built and well insulated, and the thermal mass heater kept them comfortable. James lit his fires as usual, morning and evening, and the family went about their normal activities. Cooking, reading, playing, resting. The children did not even realize how dangerous the weather outside was. Yet for families with traditional fireplaces, the blizzard was a crisis. The wind created backdrafts in chimneys, blowing smoke into cabins, making them nearly uninhabitable. Families had to choose between freezing without a fire or suffocating in smoke with a fire. Some families extinguished their fires and huddled under blankets, enduring temperatures inside their cabins that dropped below freezing. Robert Miller's family suffered terribly during the blizzard. The backdraft from the wind made their fireplace almost unusable. When Robert tried to light a fire, smoke would pour into the cabin, filling it with choking fumes. The family spent 3 days huddled in bed, wrapped in every blanket and piece of clothing they owned, shivering and miserable. Robert's youngest child, a daughter age 4, developed a severe cough during the blizzard. By the time the storm passed, she was feverish and struggling to breathe. Robert made the dangerous journey to James's cabin, desperate for help. James and Anna took the child in, warming her by the thermal mass heater, giving her hot broth and herbal tea, treating her with what medical knowledge they had. The child recovered slowly over the next week, her lungs clearing, her fever breaking. She survived, yet it was a close call. "James, your heating system saved my daughter's life," Robert said, tears in his eyes. "If we had stayed in our cabin, if she had spent another night in that cold, she would have died. I know it." James understood. He had seen how the other families were suffering, had seen the toll that inadequate heating was taking on their health and well-being. His innovation was not just about comfort or convenience. It was about survival. February 1872 was the coldest month. Temperatures regularly dropped to 40 and 50 below zero. On February 18th, the temperature reached 55 below zero, the coldest temperature ever recorded in that part of Minnesota up to that time. At that temperature, exposed skin freezes in less than 5 minutes. Breath freezes and falls as ice crystals. Metal becomes brittle and breaks. Life itself becomes precarious. By mid-February, most families with traditional fireplaces had exhausted their wood supplies. They were cutting green wood, burning fence rails, burning furniture, burning anything that would burn. Some families were burning corn, food that should have fed them through the spring, just to stay warm. The desperation was palpable. James, meanwhile, still had more than half his wood supply remaining. He had burned approximately 2 cords of wood by mid-February and had another cord and a half in reserve. At his current burn rate, he would finish the winter with wood to spare. The contrast was stark and undeniable. James's thermal mass heater was using 1/4 the wood of a traditional fireplace while providing superior heat and comfort. The economic and practical advantages were overwhelming. In late February, Robert Miller came to James's cabin again, this time with a desperate request. His family had run out of wood completely. They had burned everything they could burn. They were facing the choice of abandoning their homestead or freezing to death. "James, I need help. I have no wood left, no way to heat my cabin. Can my family stay with you? Just until the weather breaks." James did not hesitate. "Of course, Robert. Bring your family here. We have room and we have heat. You're welcome to stay as long as you need." The Miller family, Robert, his wife Sarah, and their 3 children, moved into the Peterson cabin. 9 people in a 20 by 24-foot cabin was crowded, yet it was better than freezing. And remarkably, the thermal mass heater was able to heat the cabin adequately, even with the extra people. James increased his fires slightly, burning perhaps 25 pounds of wood per fire instead of 20, and the cabin stayed warm. The Millers stayed for 2 weeks, from late February through early March. During that time, James helped Robert cut and split enough wood to get through the rest of the winter. They worked together, felling trees, hauling logs, splitting wood, building up Robert's wood supply. It was hard work in brutal cold, yet it was necessary. During those 2 weeks, Robert observed the thermal mass heater closely. He watched James light fires, watched how the system operated, felt the steady, radiant heat, saw how little wood was consumed. He calculated what he could have saved in time, in labor, in wood, in suffering if he had built such a system before winter. James, I've been a fool. You tried to tell me, tried to show me, and I didn't listen. This winter has cost me everything. My wood supply, my time, my family's health, nearly my daughter's life. And you've been comfortable and warm the whole time, using a fraction of the wood I burned. I'll never doubt you again. The experience transformed Robert from a skeptic to a believer, from a doubter to an evangelist. When he returned to his own cabin in early March, he was already planning to build a thermal mass heater as soon as spring came. And he was already telling everyone he met about James's innovation, about how it had saved his family, about how it could save others. And Robert kept his word. In the spring of 1872, he built a thermal mass heater with James's help, and he told everyone he met about the system, about how it had saved the Peterson family and could save others, about how it reduced wood consumption and labor while improving comfort. Word spread rapidly through the frontier community. By the fall of 1872, 20 families in the area had built thermal mass heaters. By 1873, the number had grown to 50. By 1875, thermal mass heating was the standard for new construction in the region, with traditional fireplaces becoming rare. The system spread beyond Minnesota. Travelers and migrants carried the knowledge to other frontier regions. By the 1880s, variations of the thermal mass heater were being built in the Dakotas, Montana, Wyoming, and other cold climate regions. The basic principles, thermal mass storage, serpentine flue, controlled combustion, were adapted to local materials and conditions, yet the core innovation remained the same. The economic impact was significant. Families that adopted thermal mass heating saved hundreds of hours of labor per year, saved money on wood or fuel, and improved their quality of life. The time and energy saved could be redirected to other productive activities: farming, crafts, education, community building. The environmental impact was also significant. By reducing wood consumption by 70% or more, thermal mass heating reduced deforestation, reduced air pollution from smoke, and promoted more sustainable use of forest resources. Areas with high adoption of thermal mass heating maintained healthier forests and cleaner air than areas that continued to rely on inefficient fireplaces. The safety impact was perhaps most important. Traditional fireplaces were dangerous, causing numerous house fires, chimney fires, and carbon monoxide poisonings each year. Thermal mass heaters, when properly built and operated, were much safer. The complete combustion produced little creosote, reducing chimney fire risk. The controlled airflow reduced the risk of backdrafts and carbon monoxide leaks. The thermal mass provided a buffer that prevented overheating and reduced fire risk. James Peterson became known throughout the region as the man who had solved the heating problem. He was consulted by builders, by homesteaders, by anyone planning to build a home in a cold climate. He never charged for his advice, believing that knowledge should be shared freely, that innovations that improve people's lives should be available to everyone. He refined his design over the years, incorporating feedback from the many families who had built systems, learning from failures and successes, continuously improving the efficiency and safety of the design. By the late 1870s, James had developed detailed plans and specifications that could be followed by any competent builder, making the technology accessible to anyone who wanted to use it. James Peterson died in 1891 at age 56, having lived to see his innovation adopted by thousands of families across the frontier. His original thermal mass heater, built in 1870, was still functioning in his cabin, still providing efficient, comfortable heat after more than 20 years of continuous use. The thermal mass heating principle that James pioneered never became mainstream in American home heating. By the late 1800s, coal stoves and later oil and gas furnaces became the dominant heating technologies, offering convenience and standardization that masonry heaters could not match. The knowledge of thermal mass heating was largely forgotten in America by the mid-20th century. Yet the principle never died completely. In Europe, particularly in Scandinavia and Eastern Europe, masonry heaters remained common throughout the 20th century. In Finland, the kakaliuni tile stove is still a standard feature in many homes. In Russia, the pechka masonry stove is a traditional heating method that continues to be used. In Austria and Germany, the Kachelofen tile stove is experiencing a revival as people seek more efficient and sustainable heating methods. In recent decades, there has been renewed interest in thermal mass heating in America. Modern builders and homeowners concerned about energy costs and environmental impact have rediscovered the principles that James Peterson pioneered in 1870. Modern masonry heaters, often called Russian fireplaces or Finnish fireplaces, incorporate the same basic design: high-temperature firebox, serpentine flue, thermal mass storage that James developed on the Minnesota frontier. These modern systems can achieve efficiency ratings of 85 to 90%, compared to perhaps 15 to 20% for traditional fireplaces. They can heat a home with 1/10 the wood of a traditional fireplace, can provide comfortable, radiant heat for 12 to 24 hours from a single fire, and can reduce heating costs by 75% or more compared to conventional heating systems. The lessons from James Peterson's innovation are profound. First, efficiency matters more than abundance. James's neighbors tried to solve the heating problem by gathering more wood, by working harder, by brute force. James solved it by using less wood more efficiently, by understanding the physics of heat transfer and combustion. Second, traditional knowledge from other cultures can be adapted to new contexts. James drew on memories of Norwegian heating systems, adapted the principles to frontier conditions, and created a solution that worked in a completely different environment. Third, simple principles can have enormous impact. James's innovation was based on basic physics. Thermal mass stores heat, serpentine paths transfer heat. Controlled combustion is more efficient. Applying these principles created a 70% improvement in efficiency. Fourth, demonstration is more powerful than explanation. By proving the system through a full winter, by showing rather than telling, James convinced skeptics and created believers. Finally, sharing knowledge multiplies its impact. James shared his innovation freely, helped neighbors build their own systems, and spread the knowledge widely. As a result, thousands of families benefited. The story of James Peterson and his thermal mass heater is a story about innovation born from necessity, about the power of understanding basic principles, about the value of efficiency over brute force. It is a story about one man who refused to accept that winter heating had to be expensive, exhausting, and uncomfortable, who believed there was a better way, and who had the knowledge and determination to create it. James Peterson's heating system made winter heating cost almost nothing, not literally nothing, yet so little that the cost became negligible compared to traditional methods. His family stayed warm and comfortable on 3 cords of wood per winter, while neighbors burned 10 or 12 cords and still froze. His innovation saved hundreds of hours of labor, saved money, saved forests, and saved lives. That is the story. That is the legacy. That is the lesson that James Peterson left for all of us, that efficiency is more valuable than abundance, that knowledge is more powerful than labor, that understanding how things work is the key to making them work better. Winter heating does not have to cost everything. With the right approach, with the right knowledge, with the right system, it can cost almost nothing.